Terrible sexual abuse out of the Catholic Church. Even worse sexual abuse coming from our government schools. The American left wants to rebrand vaginas as front holes, and Charlie Kirk coming up next. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and thank you again for joining us. Coming up later in the show, we're going to talk to Charlie Kirk with some advice about kids going back to college campuses. Until then, we've got Katie Petrick of the Healthy Republic here for today's top stories.
All right. The main story we're focusing on this week is what we're learning coming out of the Catholic Church, specifically in Pennsylvania, where we learned last week through an 884-page grand jury report that the Roman Catholic Church officials in Pennsylvania systematically covered up molestation of more than 1,000 children by more than 300 priests over the course of more than 70 years. So this widespread abuse of boys and girls dated back to the 1940s, and we're learning that 6 of the 8 dioceses failed to report this abuse and failed to protect children. And on Monday, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the 1.2 billion Roman Catholics around the world condemning what happened and calling it atrocities. He said, "We showed no care for the little ones. We abandoned them. It is essential that we as a church be able to acknowledge and condemn with sorrow and shame the atrocities perpetrated by consecrated persons, clerics, and all those entrusted with the mission of watching over and caring for those most vulnerable."
This is a tedious story because it never seems to have an end. And the first thing that has to be said is, if the Catholic Church doesn't clean house, that means anybody who's guilty of these charges or anybody who's abetted them immediately gone. If that means cutting your already dwindling laity or clergy by 25, 45, 55%, you got to do it. Better a greatly diminished church than a corrupted church. And here's the problem that I have. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this very often. Where did these priests come from? I get that any human organization has its weaknesses, and an organization with the scope and the reach of the Catholic Church is going to be that much more corrupt. It's true of any secular organization as well. Having said that, Catholic Church, like all Christian churches, has a higher responsibility to behave better, not a lower one. When you think about what's been going on in the church, you've got 2 generations, 3 generations of social justice, liberation theology priests. You have an activist homosexual culture within the church. That's been said by many people, many inside Catholics now at the Vatican are complaining that you have a very activist, militantly political homosexual wing of priests, of high-ranking clerics. And so if you're going to have a commitment to social justice, which is anathema to Christian justice, you can't square that circle. Progressive left-wing secularists want to pretend that Christ was a social justice warrior. He wasn't. The Catholic Church has given in to left-wing progressive politics on so many issues, on border control, on sexuality, on homosexuality, that they really don't have a leg to stand on. You've got adult, and it's primarily a homosexual issue. Overwhelmingly, the abuse, at least in American churches, seems to be adult male priests sexually abusing children, male children. And I've heard calls in the mainstream media, I've heard calls from people to argue that what they need to do is allow priests to marry. They need to break down the sexual taboos of the Roman Catholic Church. They need to free priests to have active sex lives. I would simply say this. If that's what you're going to do, you're going to remove the vow of chastity. You're going to start ordaining women. You're going to have priests marry. You're going to make sex part of the priesthood. You're going to make the problem worse, not better. Because what's got the Catholic Church into this mess to begin with is far too permissive and worldly attitudes toward sex that are not biblical, that are not theologically, dogmatically true of the Catholic Church. The more you endorse these kind of social justice positions, the more you're going to get it. Why do we have so many Marxist priests? Why do we have a Roman Catholic Pope who is more comfortable lecturing the world about the environment than about the teachings of Christ? It's because you have made too much friends with the world. Like every other main Christian church, like almost every other church in the world outside of the radically Islamic ones who've gone the fascist way, the Roman Catholic Church, like most Christian churches, has surrendered itself to progressive social justice ideology. It started in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s with social justice warrior liberation theology displacing real Catholic dogma. And ever since then, it's been one relentless push to the left for the Catholic Church, concluding with this Pope. A Pope who wasn't duly elected. Only after the resignation of Benedict did this Pope become elevated to the Pope. I'll never forget it. The fact that he stood in Cuba a few years ago with the Castro brothers, with Che Guevara right behind him, murderers, lecturing Western culture for its wealth and its prosperity. It shows you that this pope is nothing. It starts at the top. I think this pope should resign. You, sir, if you are a social justice warrior, you have presided over, for a good number of years now, one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, the Roman Catholic clergy. You have abetted, you have turned, no amount of getting on your knees and saying we have to be compassionate. No meetings with the victims now are enough. By your own social justice bona fides, you should step down. Make an example of yourself. You have done nothing to fix this. You still haven't condemned all the sources of this within the church. I have yet to hear you reassert Christian sexual values in the midst of this. Too careful are you not to offend homosexual sensibilities. It's time for you to go. You are the figurehead. You would be calling, if any other secular organization, you'd be calling for accountability at the top. You are the top. It's time to go.
Well, and here's the thing that is not being addressed as much as it should be, and it involves our public and private schools. Because you speak of the secular institutions that their heads should be called for, and it's not happening. But we found out that this exact same top-down ignorance, I guess, of what's happening is happening in our public schools. And the Department of Justice is still using 2004 data, but they found that an estimated 1 in 10 students will have experienced sexual misconduct by a school employee. 1 in 10. Now, that's 10% of our students are being sexually abused. This doesn't include any physical or psychological abuse, just sexual abuse. We have more than 56 million public and private school kids in our system. So 5.6 million students will at some point in their K through 12 education be sexually abused.
When you consider the massive scale sexual corruption in organizations like the American public schools, you just pointed out roughly 60 million American school kids, by their own calculations, 10% of those will be sexually harassed, if not abused, in the course of their school term. That is sexual abuse at a much higher scale than what we've seen numerically in the Catholic Church, and no one says a word about it. We are seeing in the news every day adult women having sex with 15 and 14 and 13-year-old boys, but that's not such a big deal, right? Because little boys are all sex-crazed anyway.
By their own statistics, as of 2014, 46 of our states had mandatory reporting laws that if anything happened, they have to report any abuse. They found that 5% have actually been reporting. We saw this year in numerous cases, James O'Keefe has done his undercover work. What's happening, instead of these teachers being fired or let go or criminally charged, they get this passing the trash, it's called, or the lemon dance, where these teachers are able to go for up to 3 different school districts to kind of cover up what they did. Let's just pass them along. And by their own accounts, again, this can make it so one teacher can affect up to 73 different victims.
Yeah, and you know why this is? Because teachers have unions. You want to get rid of sexual corruption in American government schools? Get rid of the unions. Get rid of the unions now, because they are absolutely dedicated to protecting sexual predators in the schools so they don't lose their precious benefits, they don't lose their jobs, they get reassigned, and they offend again, they reassault again.
All right, well, we are in back to school season, so we have some stories coming out of the college campuses. And we begin with colleges rejecting applicants who follow controversial people on Twitter. And the key word here is follow. So we know that colleges have been looking at what you post and retweet if you're on Twitter, but now they're actually looking at who you're following. Maybe you're following both political spectrums, which, you know, you're just trying to find information, but now they're going to reject you. In a post on his website for Sheer Social Media, attorney Bradley Sheer told the story of a client who was asked by a prestigious college why he followed conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who we know has been in the news because he got kicked off of all the platforms. Sheer wrote, "We are not talking about applicants who are retweeting alleged hate speech, alleged fake news, or alleged hoaxes. We're talking about just following a Twitter feed of someone whose views are frowned upon by members of an admissions committee. Many college admissions offices, such as Harvard, are encouraging anyone who has digital dirt on an applicant or accepted student to send it to the admissions department so they can reject an applicant or even revoke an offer."
Yeah, so we shouldn't be surprised by this. Who controls admissions boards? The idea that college admissions boards, they go out into the real world and hire headhunters and corporate people to go out there and find the best students? No way. The people who run admissions boards are people who are professors, people who are up to their nose in academia. Their whole background is academia. Are we the least bit surprised that they're now using social media to try to screen out conservatives? Because that's what it is. In the same way that the big liberal tech companies aren't silencing progressive left-wing voices who call for violence, violence, they're silencing even moderate conservative voices. Same thing happens at your university campuses. These people aren't interested in what they can teach you. They're interested, do you fit the paradigm? They want a certain kind of student. They don't want you if you're not woke. They don't want you if you're a white male. They don't want you unless you're a recalcitrant, apologetic, utterly humiliated white male. That kind of white male is acceptable. But if you're a minority of any kind, regardless of any kind of violence you preach, you line yourself with Antifa or Black Lives Matter, you become anarchist, right? You participate in ripping down monuments illegally, as just happened in North Carolina with the police standing by. Nothing's going to happen to you. It's a resume enhancer. So if you're out there applying to college, 2 pieces of advice for you. One, don't apply as you if you're a white male, particularly a conservative one. Conservative anybody. And it's even worse, if you're a black male conservative and you have ties to conservative sites, don't apply under that aegis. Do what they're doing. Create dummy profiles. I hate to tell you to do this, but check every box on the list. What are they going to do? You've got them by the short hairs, in a way. You apply for college, university, and you check that you're homosexual, you're transsexual, you're gender fluid. You check you're Native American, you're African American. Check them all. The minute they come, or pick a few carefully slotted ones that scream diversity. The minute they come and ask you, or try to research your actual background, you got them. Because on American campuses today, you are what you say you are, right? If you say you're a woman, and we have to treat you as a woman. If you say you're a man, got to treat you as a man. We can't argue this point. You get to use the bathroom of your choice just by making a declaration. Well, declare what you are, right? Fake declare what you are. The minute they come after you to try to verify it, you got a lawsuit. Because they're not verifying. If I'm a man who pretends I'm a woman on a college campus and they start to investigate me, they want to look in my closet, they want a picture of do I depilatate myself in the right places to make myself more feminine? They want that. They want to start going down that road. That's a civil lawsuit. So in other words, they have skewed and warped the way they accept students. So you got 2 choices. You can play it straight, in all the ironic ways that's meant. You can play it straight and not get into the school you want, or you can play by their own stupid rules and beat them at their own game.
All right. When you go back to campus this semester, I'm not sure if you've adjusted your syllabus to look like this, but there are many professors who are adjusting their syllabus so that the students are allowed to pick their own grades. Professor Melissa Gonzalez teaches Introduction to Spanish Literatures and Cultures courses at Davidson College in North Carolina. She's a Hispanic Studies professor, but wait for it, also teaches in the Gender and Sexuality Studies department. And she's one of several professors across the country using this pick-your-own-grade system. So at the very beginning of the semester, you're going to sign a contract of all the work you're going to do to get your A, all the work you're going to do to get a B, or apparently no work to get the F, I would assume. But she's saying this is a way to eliminate the student-professor power differential and give students control of their education because they don't have any control at the moment. She argues there's a strong pedagogical rationale for contract grading. It can help students focus on learning more than on grades, and therefore makes more progress in their learning with less anxiety. I aim to foster classroom environments that are radically democratic and empower intellectual risk-taking.
Yeah, so if you're going to empower the students to teach themselves, what do we need you for and your stupid degree in gender studies? Seriously, if the purpose of education is not to teach, because here's another thing. What's her name?
It is Melissa Gonzalez.
Melissa Gonzalez. Here's another thing. You signed a contract, too. I don't give a rat's rip what contract you made the kids sign. You signed a contract to be a responsible, professional teacher, one who assigns grades, one who measures student achievement, one who, in a supposedly nonpartisan way, assesses which students excel and which ones don't, and then grades them accordingly. You have broken your contract in the name of your stupid gender quotas, and so why should they follow your contract? Why should you hold them accountable? And if you're going to let them, as I said before, you're going to let them control their own education, you and your tenure are utterly unnecessary. So I guess this is the other thing. It makes perfect sense. If you're bringing kids to school, on the previous story, not because of who they are, or their intellect, or their scores, or their achievement, or their academic prowess, you're bringing people to school because they're woke or they're not. Once you get the woke crowd assembled, you can't fail any of them, right? Once you've admitted people on the virtue of their wokeness, you can't start delineating between how woke you are. So this way, everybody gets an A. You only invite the people you want, and once you got the progressives all in there, then you give them all A's, because to give a progressive a B is offensive to a progressive. In other words, let's just shut down the entire university system right now.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Melissa's class is going to go, because last count she had 2 students, so we'll see if those two students get to sign a contract or if the class has to be canceled.
Well, that's very democratic. You get one teacher and two students. That's the workload my colleagues keep screaming for. And there's no papers to grade, evidently. So what do we got going here? I mean, they could sit around and have fancy Starbucks coffees and discuss gender oppression and the fact that, and we know why there's only two people signed up for that class. They didn't admit enough woke people.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And we know one thing they won't be doing is throwing snowballs, because we have a public university saying no more snowballs. The Delaware State University is forbidding its students from throwing snowballs, a policy that a school official says is due in part to the potential harm that snowball fights pose to those on campus. The rule in the Division of Student Affairs Student Judicial Handbook lists, quote, the throwing of snowballs on university grounds under the personal violations category, alongside violations such as being in the bath or shower areas of the opposite sex and making threats of violence or intimidation. So they ban the snowballs. They also forbid you to use or possess a water gun, a super soaker, and etc. They don't even list what the other ones are, on university premises or during university activities. There will be disciplinary action for those who violate the student
you go
code
back
of
to
conduct.
that? Did you just read that you're not allowed to be in the bathroom areas of the opposite sex?
Yeah, it says,
Go ahead and read that to me. We'll get to snowballs in a moment. Here's my thought. If you just called them snow ovaries, we'd be throwing them all over campus, right? It's the balls that bother them. Snow women and snow ovaries, people will be throwing them at each other in the main administration building. But I want you to step back and read for me. Is the University of Delaware?
Delaware State
Delaware
University.
State. I want you to read what it just said about being the wrong gender in a bathroom. Read that statement.
It said under personal violations category, it was alongside violations including being in the shower or bath areas of the opposite sex.
Being in the shower areas of the opposite sex is a disciplinary violation at Delaware State University. So, what do we now know? Right? That if you call yourself a transgender person, if you have male giddy-goes or female giddy-goes and you're in the wrong bathroom, you should be brought up on charges at Delaware State University. And we're going to talk about snowballs, right?
Yes.
Frozen testicularity on a college campus.
And they're white.
Can't throw those white balls of snow back and forth. It reminds me of a Saturday Night Live. Are these sweaty balls?
Sweaty balls?
Are these sweaty balls?
Oh,
it reminds me of a Saturday Night
balls.
Live. So seriously, you can't throw snowballs at each other for obviously patriarchal reasons. And now I just want to make it absolute. Here's the revelation. It was an accidental revelation. You didn't think we were going to go here, did you?
Nope.
You thought we were going to talk about frozen balls.
Exactly.
This is the revelation. Delaware State's own disciplinary handbook says that if you are the wrong gender for the bathroom you're in, you can be punished. Let's see how fast. We're going to send this. Mike, hashtag this on Delaware State University when we release it. Let's see 1 week before that language is removed. Let's see how long it takes.
Okay. We are going to put this next story under the list of, oh, you don't say stories. We have a professor warning that liberal bias is hurting academic research. George Yancey, he's the head of the sociology department at the University of North Texas. He says that lack of conservative scholars is undermining the accuracy and integrity of scientific research. You don't say. He wrote a piece called Yes, Academic Bias is a Problem and We Need to Address It. And it was put in the American Sociologist. And this was a response to a professor who dismissed political bias among academics as being a myth. So Yancey says, one of the most important assumptions of the scientific method is that scholars are disinterested in the results of the work. Given the reality that academics are much more politically progressive and irreligious than the general population, one should be concerned about the potential of liberal and secular bias in academic research. We have to question whether scholars are as dispassionate about the results as they claim to be. Those like myself are also concerned about academic bias simply because such bias can lead to bad science. And I say preach on.
It's shocking how far down the progressive rabbit hole that we've gone that we actually have to point out that this is true, right? This is a revelation. And Yancey is both black and a professor of sociology. And sociology is one of the most corrupt liberal endeavors on a college campus. So you had a smug, woke, white professor who wrote an article basically arguing that there is no such thing as campus myth. We university professors aren't biased in the least. For the last 40 years, I have heard nothing on university campuses other than the fact that anytime a monolithic group controls any aspect of culture, they by definition are biased, right? So corporations are bad because corporations as collective entities have their own politics, they're bad. Churches, religions, gangs, cults, the Ku Klux Klan, anytime you get people together in large groups, there is a political dynamic there that oppresses other people. Miraculously, this applies to every other collective of people on the planet except for university professors, who skew sometimes 9 out of 10 on college campuses in certain departments to liberal over conservative, but they have no bias. Everybody else has bias. You don't have bias. Well, you have an African-American sociology professor who looked you in the eye and said, bunk, right? And here's the thing. To have that kind of monolithic control over education and ideas is guaranteed to provide bias. There's no way to keep it out. And I'll go one step further. Why is the academic left now attacking the scientific method, now attacking logic, now attacking reason, now attacking right answers in science and math and economics? They're attacking those things because those things are ways to prove your bias, rather than admit their bias as progressive lefties and how they're pushing their bias into every aspect of the social sciences and the humanities, corrupting the great books of Western culture with these garbage progressive lenses. They're going after the few entities that could disprove their bias. Reason, logic, truth, the scientific method. All right? So there you go.
Yep, Yancey summarized it very well. He says, it disturbs me that science cannot reach its full potential when the results are preordained by political and social concerns.
Sounds great to me. That's
exactly
that's
what's
the
happening.
First thing I've heard from a sociologist in the last 30 years that would make me want to take a sociology course.
All right, well, we're saving the most woke story for last. So we're learning that the vagina is no longer gender inclusive.
Yes, the word
FYI.
vagina.
So Healthline's website, it's a website that's one of the most trafficked websites in the U.S. Of course, they're based in California. They claim health disparities and higher rates of HIV and STIs, formerly known as STDs, in the LGBTQ plus communities is due to discrimination in the sex ed world. So instead of using the medical term vagina, they're going to use the term front hole.
Wait, say that again. Front
hole.
Front hole.
Front hole
is what medical researchers are arguing has to replace the word vagina because the word vagina is too sex specific.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. So
okay.
In the latest LGBTQ/XYZ Safe Sex Guide, they said, this is gender-inclusive language that's considerate of the fact that some trans people don't identify with the labels the medical community attaches to their genitals. I argue I'm not going to identify with the label they're trying to put out. For example, some trans and non-binary identified people assigned female at birth may enjoy being the receptors of penetrative sex, but experience experience gender dysphoria when that part of their body is referred to using a word that society and professional communities often associate with femaleness. An alternative that's becoming increasingly popular in trans and queer communities is front hole.
Okay, so this proves exactly what we just said about the sociology argument, right? That the progressive left, and that absolutely includes the woke scolds who identify as lesbian, gay, transgender, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The fact is that now they're coming after the word vagina. Vagina is not a label, ladies and gentlemen. Vagina is a long-standing medical term, clinical term for an anatomical body part. And because it doesn't fit your definition of gender now, because you want to deconstruct that, you're offended by the word vagina now. And so you're going to use, instead of the word vagina, front hole. I pretty much can guarantee you, up until this very moment, if I referred to any woman as a walking, talking front hole, that perhaps might be viewed worse than the runt word, the see you next Tuesday word, right?
Yeah, it's quite possible.
Quite possible. As somebody who possesses a front hole. Right?
You're assuming.
I'm assuming your gender. I'm assuming you have a front hole. Right? If I called you the C word, or I called you a squawking front hole, which would offend you more?
I would punch you either way.
You'd punch me either way.
I would say you're confused as to what why wouldn't you just?
Yeah,
You're stuck, aren't you?
I am.
You're stuck.
I'm so confused because I learned in kindergarten cop.
Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
I'm lost.
My other
Keep
question.
Going. You got another question. All right.
Is what are they going to do about the vagina monologues? Is it now going to be termed front hole monologues?
Well, the vagina monologues are a classic case. If you haven't been paying attention, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a big push on to rename them because the vagina monologues are not inclusive of women who don't have vaginas. Now, you used to call women who don't have vaginas men.
Oh.
That used to be the word, right?
Once upon a
women
time.
who don't have vaginas, they're not really women. They're men.
What?
But you can't say that anymore. And so this is it's a stupid story. It's an offensive story. The fact that they're replacing the word vagina, which is pretty neutral, with something that could obviously and historically be viewed as a slur. Basically, you're taking a woman or a person and you're reducing them to a gap, right, a hole. It seems to me we have the word ass blank, right? So that's a slur, right? When you reduce people to orifices, right, this is our conclusion. When you reduce people to orifices, basically squawking sphincters, people tend to get a little upset, unless you're part of the new transgender gay alliance. And we're going to throw out. Did you know did you ever stop to think that Grey's Anatomy would be one of those books that the progressive left would have to have banned? Words like vagina and penis, they so trap people in paradigms of their bodies. We need a whole new medical lexicon. Well, this is already partially upon us. In England, in the UK, doctors and nurses are forbidden, right, by the National Health to use the word mother when a pregnant woman comes into their offices. To call a pregnant woman mom or a mom-to-be is offensive because not all pregnant women, not only women can be pregnant and mothers. So this kind of hysterical, and by hysterical I don't mean funny, I mean utterly insane, over-the-top reactionary garbage is already beginning to permeate our universities, our college campuses, our medical facilities. It's not far away before, if we're at the point now to misgender somebody, to call somebody by the wrong pronoun, is a microaggression and it might be a hate crime. We're very close to the point where identifying yourself as having a penis or a vagina is going to be the same kind of thought crime. To say that I as a man have a penis is to deny other men without penises that agency. And we're real close to the point where they're going to come after those words too. Someone's got to stop this now, right? And all I can tell, my final word on this, anybody who insists that a vagina is a front hole clearly is a back hole.
Okay, and that's going to segue right into our dunce of the day. Over the weekend, I think one of the funniest and also most saddening stories came from what happened with the Reverend Al Sharpton on MSNBC on his morning show. He went into this long tirade about President Trump and how President Trump is awful. And at the very end of it, he tried to pay a little tribute to Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, who passed away last week. And so here he is, trying to spell.
So in the words of my late friend Aretha Franklin, show some RESPICT.
Find out what it means
Al Sharpton. Is this some kind of a woke ebonics new phonetics that I don't know about? Are we allowed to make fun of him for not being able to spell the word respect?
Well, I am, because he's automatically our.
Yeah, so we're not even gonna.
No, he just wins it. RESPICT.
RESPICT. Well, I mean, it's a little bit better than corpseman. I remember when Obama misread his wonderful teleprompter and called Corman corpseman. So we have that. We've got that to go with. But yeah, I find it hard to argue. And not only that, we had the VMA Awards last night. Madonna got up and gave the eulogy for Aretha Franklin. And people are complaining justifiably because she went on and on and on. And it was mostly about her. White vajayjay having Madonna has basically usurped all the time she was supposed to eulogize Aretha Franklin to talk about her own wonderful achievements and how wonderful she is. Talk about cultural appropriation. But all I can think of when I listen to the Reverend Sharpton spell respect wrong is our favorite clip from Michael Scott.
Michael Scott.
Roll it, Mikey.
Respect. RESPCT. Find out what it means to me.
In the spirit of Michael Scott, we've got to give today's Dundie to the Reverend Al.
I think he deserves it very much so. So if you like what you saw today on the Dr. Duke Show, if you agree that Michael Scott, Reverend Al Sharpton, get a Dundie and a dunce for the day, make sure you give us a like on Facebook, head over to YouTube, watch us again, and if you'd like, you can always listen to us on SoundCloud and iTunes. Up next, we have Charlie Kirk.
Time now for Talking Points with Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA. Well, Charlie, it's back to school time, and a new school year is upon us. Millions of kids are heading to universities for the very first time. Given how nakedly political and ideological campuses become, what advice can you give to students about how to survive politically and morally on a college campus these days?
Well, you pointed out the right word. It's about survival. Our campuses have become total and complete centers of indoctrination and intolerance. So my advice is always to hear ideas that you disagree with, but also make sure that you are rooted in the timeless ideas of freedom, smaller government, individual initiative, natural rights, self-governance, so on and so forth. But what's so interesting is that these ideas are not necessarily even being taught from an opposition perspective. They're not being taught at all in our universities. And this is something you and I know is so important, and the project that you're doing is so important, because if young people are not exposed to these ideas from a young age, then they're going to automatically think they don't exist. And then when they are presented with them, they'll say, oh, there's no way I didn't learn that in school. There's no way that can't be possibly true. And you and I know that some of the best ideas are actually not being taught in our schools.
You know, to me, as a 25-year university professor, I'm getting ready to start campus again as well. And throughout the humanities, people want to discount the humanities. They want to focus on STEM and the hard sciences. Here's the problem. What goes on in these kids' 2 years of gen ed courses, that's what's going to color them politically. And all the reading strategies, all the way we make kids read books in universities, Marxism, feminism, queer theory, environmentalism. How did we get to the point, Charlie, where the only way kids are allowed to read books, even good books, is through these radically politically leftist activist lenses?
Well, we sacrificed the universities to very, very far left influences, Marxist influences that do not love America, and they're generally very dissatisfied individuals of their status quo of America. So you and I were very thankful we live in America. These people are angry that we live in America, and they're trying to teach this sort of anger and hostility upon a generation that unfortunately does not know any better. And then they also simultaneously try to paint the false promise and the false appearance and aberration of utopianism. You pair all these things together, you got a lot of problems. And what I'm most concerned about, what I'm most worried about, is that young people are falling for the trap and the false song of Marxism. And you can see, the track record of the last 100 years. It hasn't been successful in the least. It's been actually catastrophic on every single level.
If you think about all the things that I listed, things like feminism, things like environmentalism, how it's creeping into schools, these are really just following the Marxist playbook. I don't know that many kids have the history anymore to understand that all of these activist readings, they ultimately do go back to Marxism, and they are promoting socialism. As somebody who is on campus a lot like me, your organization, Turning Point, and that's the first place maybe we should start. Any kids watching this today, get involved with those really good organizations on campus that aren't Marxist, like Turning Point. I mean, you guys are dedicated to teaching primary capitalist free market economics. Talk a little bit, first of all, about when kids go to campus, how can they hook up with Turning Point, and what would they expect if they were able to join a local Turning Point section?
So yeah, they can go to our website, tpusa.com, and they can email one of our many, many field directors to get engaged, get involved, and start a chapter on campus. And look, we try to be the counterbalance against the aggressive Marxist teaching that happens in our universities. And you and I both know that if we do not get our viewpoint out, we are going to have a generation of socialists and communists and Marxists. And I don't say those words lightly, because it's very, very true, that will be dedicated to the fundamental destruction of the greatest country ever to exist. And I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm not going to sit idly by while we watch this republic and this beautiful country deteriorate from within. And so we want every young person watching this to get engaged and involved with Turning Point USA, tpusa.com. And our staff would love to work with you. We have amazing events. We have wonderful training programs. And look, this is the battle for the soul of this country. I have a book coming out in a couple weeks, Campus Battlefield, talking about how conservatives can actually win again on college campuses, something that I'm very, very proud of. So this is a very exciting time to be involved in this fight, but equally as consequential as it is exciting.
What kind of pushback, as you've been monitoring TPUSA organizations, what kind of pushback do they usually encounter from schools? What kinds of flies do they try to stick in the ointment of kids organizing this way?
So yeah, I mean, there's an unbelievable amount of pushback that we receive from the administration, from students, from activists. But we relish in the fight. We don't try to play the victim. We don't try to say, oh, poor us, we're being fought back against. Instead, we stand our ground, and we stand for what we believe in, and then we look we look assertively towards our student leaders to be able to plant the flag and realize they're probably not going to win some of these fights. But if you can win converts over, and you can win hundreds of other students, if not thousands of other students over, that's worth all the effort that you can put into it. And look, this is a culture war. This is not a political war. Politics are downstream from culture. It's so important to realize that. I like to say these universities have become islands of totalitarianism where free speech, dialogue, discourse, they're not present whatsoever. And where if we are going to sacrifice the entire terrain of higher education to far left-wing Marxist radicals, we will soon have a country that is unrecognizable.
Where would you send kids in this culture? Because they're not going to get real good economic, real good history at college campuses. It's all going to be biased. Where would you send them to try to find sources that will balance out, like you say, Turning Point is a counterbalance? Where else in the culture would you send them?
I'd send them to you at the Freedom Project, and the work that you're doing. But also, I would also tell them, look, go to Prager University. I don't like the big institutional, bureaucratic, educational monoliths. Instead, I'm actually a big believer in autodidactic learning, which is self-taught learning. Go after the greatest books in human history. Just sit down and read Montesquieu and Thomas Aquinas and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. And then all of a sudden you can get a better understanding of the foundational ideas that created, free society, Western civilization, the idea of a republic, and then finally the inspiration of the greatest country ever to exist. But here's the question is, since you and I believe so, we're so firmly committed in these ideas, why is the left so afraid to have our viewpoints represented on these campuses? And my opinion would be they're actually afraid because they know that when our ideas are given a platform and to be heard, that they start losing and we start winning converts. And so instead of trying to prove us wrong, they try to shut us up. And there's something fundamentally evil about trying to silence opposition just because you disagree with them.
Yeah, and my experience is exactly that, Charlie. 25 years ago when I started teaching college, back then they at least would present both sides. They would let the kids read a book, and then they would try to sway the kids' opinion of a book. But here's the problem. When you put the great books of the Western classics in front of kids, and then the professor's politics, 99 times out of 100, kids chose the books, they didn't choose the politics. And what's changed for me in 25 years, now they won't even let kids understand books as books. Before you even read Aquinas or you even read Montesquieu, they've already started with this indoctrination that this is Marxism, this is sexist, racist, homophobic American history. So even when kids get good books put in front of them now, it's overridden by the ideology and the politics.
That's right, yes. And so it's a revisionist history of even the great classical works. And this is why what you're doing is so important, and we need more people just to teach history, not how you want it to be, but how it was, but also the core elements and the hero's journey of the American experience. America is the greatest country ever to exist, not just because of what we've accomplished, but what we've overcome and how we've dealt with the improper actions of the past. I mean, if you look at why America is the only country ever to exist to send its own citizens to die for the freedoms of others. I mean, think about that. We're the only country, we're the most benevolent, the most generous, the most creative, the most forward-thinking country ever. Yet you walk into a university lecture hall, they say, well, Charlie, we're a racist, bigoted, homophobic country, founded illegally, stealing the lands of indigenous people. I'm like, what are you talking about? That is such a misinterpretation and such a disservice to the actual American experience and story. And so it's up to people like you and I to continue to do our work so that we can accurately educate and teach the next generation how thankful they should be to live in America and to live in Western civilization, what a free society means, and what they as an individual can do to participate and thrive in such a society.
Charlie, before I let you go, one last thing. Our high school kids, are feeling the radical pressure to go to college, to get tens of thousands of dollars in debt, even when many of them don't need it or don't need it right away. And they don't need it to get hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I wanted to get your thoughts on this, maybe a shout out. Let kids know that if college isn't for them or if it's not the right time, that it's better to do something else, maybe get a job, save some money, before putting yourself in debt. College is not something that everybody has to have, and they don't have to have it when they're 18 years old.
That's correct, yes. So we ask our high school seniors, where are you going to college, not why are you going to college? Every other major consumer decision we make throughout our life, we weigh the cost, the benefit, the analysis. Except college. College decisions are determined on such superfluous, silly, just like reasons. I guess that's the right word. Oh, I like that fraternity. I like the sports team. It's close to home. My parents want me to go there. College should not be based on any of those things. It should be based on, is it worth me assuming debt so that I could learn something that will actually make me better prepared or more likely to be employed for something that I care about and that I'll want to do for the rest of my life? And a perfectly acceptable answer to that is, I don't know what I want to do with my life. That's okay. That's fine. Then take a year off. Go do a gap year. Work. Go do an internship. Ask someone who might be in a field you enjoy to spend a couple months with them and just volunteer. Use your early years, your formative years, not to assume debt, not to get yourself in a terrible financial circumstance, but to do what you enjoy, to assume skills, experiences, connections that might make you more likely to be employed, but at least you can figure out what you don't want to do. And that's not what college should be. College should not be a place where you go and you experience a lot of different things and you're trying to try things out. No, it's way too expensive for that. That's a complete and total waste of time. College should be about career preparation, not life exploration.
Charlie, fantastic words. I'll say this. The fact that universities are willing to accept more and more kids who are intellectually and academically unprepared, let those kids get $100,000 in debt and graduate them with degrees in areas that they cannot possibly get a job, that's the first lesson that I know Turning Point wants to teach these kids. This is how universities are anti-free markets, and this is how ultimately universities are working against our kids.
That's correct. That's exactly right. And you and I are both part of the solution, and we're going to win.
Charlie, thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you again next week.